Silas Monroe had everything money could buy, but he'd lost the only thing that truly mattered. The tech mogul's empire was worth hundreds of millions, yet his penthouse felt emptier than ever since Helena's passing 3 years ago. He walked through Central Park every morning, hoping the routine might fill the void in his chest. Then he saw the boy with the sketch pad, drawing portraits that seemed to capture souls. When Silas bought one of those drawings for $20, he nearly collapsed. Staring back at him from the crumpled paper was Helena's face, perfect down to the tiny scar above her left eyebrow. The boy had never met his wife, had never even seen her photograph. How could an 8-year-old stranger draw the woman who haunted his dreams? Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Silas Monroe adjusted his Italian silk tie as he stepped out of his black Mercedes onto Fifth Avenue. The morning sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk, and the familiar weight of loneliness settled on his shoulders like an expensive coat he couldn't remove. At 42, he commanded a technology empire that employed thousands and generated revenues exceeding $800 million annually. Yet as he walked toward Central Park for his daily ritual, the numbers felt meaningless against the hollow ache that had consumed him since Helena's funeral. 3 years had passed since the car accident that stole his wife, but time had proven to be a cruel myth rather than the healer everyone promised it would be. His penthouse apartment, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, felt more like a mausoleum than a home. The silence there was deafening, broken only by the hum of expensive appliances and the distant sound of traffic far below. His morning walks had become his only escape from the suffocating emptiness of success without someone to share it with. Central Park in November painted a picture of transition, with autumn leaves carpeting the pathways in shades of amber and crimson. Silas followed his usual route past the boat pond, where remote-controlled sailboats drifted lazily across the water's surface. The crisp air filled his lungs, and for brief moments, he could almost forget the weight pressing against his chest. Almost. Near the Bethesda fountain, he noticed something different. A small crowd had gathered around a park bench, where a young boy sat with an easel and sketch pad. The child couldn't have been older than 8 or 9, with unruly dark hair and paint-stained fingers that moved across the paper with surprising precision. Curious despite himself, Silas approached the growing circle of onlookers. "That's incredible," whispered a woman beside him, clutching her coffee cup. "He's been drawing portraits of people all morning, and they're absolutely perfect." Silas peered over the shoulders in front of him and felt his breath catch. The boy was sketching an elderly man who had volunteered to pose, and the likeness was extraordinary. Every wrinkle, every expression line, every subtle shadow fell exactly where it should. The child worked with an intensity that seemed far beyond his years, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration as he captured not just the man's appearance, but something deeper, something that spoke to the soul behind the sapperobie. Weathered features. "How much for a portrait?" asked the young mother, bouncing a toddler on her hip. The boy looked up with eyes that seemed older than they should be. $20, he said softly, his voice carrying a slight accent that Silas couldn't quite place. "But I don't take requests. I draw when I see." "What you see?" The woman seemed puzzled. "Sometimes I see faces that aren't here," the boy explained matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. "They come to me when I'm drawing. I don't know why." A chill ran down Silas's spine that had nothing to do with the November air. Something about the child's words stirred a memory he couldn't quite grasp, like trying to remember a dream after waking. He found himself pushing through the small crowd until he stood directly in front of the makeshift artist's station. "I'd like to buy one," Silas heard himself saying. The boy looked up at him with startling intensity, studying his face as if memorizing every detail. Dark eyes that seemed to hold depths of understanding no child should possess met Silas's gaze without flinching. For a moment, the world around them faded into background noise. "Sit there," the boy said, pointing to a spot on the grass. "But I might not draw you." "I don't understand." "Sometimes other faces come instead. Faces that need to be seen." The child was already reaching for a fresh sheet of paper, his small hands moving with practiced efficiency as he arranged his materials. Silas settled onto the grass, feeling slightly ridiculous in his $1,000 suit, but something compelled him to stay. The boy began to draw, his pencil moving in swift, confident strokes. The crowd gradually dispersed as the novelty wore off, leaving just Silas and the mysterious young artist in their strange communion of silence. 20 minutes passed before the boy looked up. "It's finished." He turned the sketch pad around, and Silas felt the world tilt on its axis. Staring back at him from the paper was Helena's face, rendered with impossible precision. Every detail was perfect. The gentle curve of her smile, the way her hair fell across her left shoulder, even the tiny scar above her eyebrow from a childhood accident she'd told him about on their third date. The drawing captured not just her physical features, but something more profound, something that spoke of warmth and kindness and a spirit that had touched everyone she met. "Where," Silas's voice came out as barely a whisper, "where did you see this face?" The boy tilted his head, studying Silas with those unnaturally perceptive eyes. "She's been with you," he said simply. "She follows you when you walk. She's sad because you're sad." Silas felt tears he hadn't shed in months threatening to spill down his cheeks. His hands trembled as he reached for his wallet, pulling out not just $20 but all the cash he had, nearly $300. "Take this, please." The boy accepted the money without counting it, his attention focused entirely on Silas's face. "You loved her very much." She was everything. The words escaped before Silas could stop them. "She was my whole world." "She wants you to be happy again," the boy said with the certainty of someone far older. "She told me to draw her for you so you'd know she's still here. What's your name?" Silas managed to ask, clutching the drawing against his chest. "Leo. Leo Navarro." The surname hit Silas like a physical blow. Navarro. He knew that name, knew it from a time before Helena, from a brief but intense relationship that had ended when career ambitions pulled them in different directions. Maria Navarro had been a struggling artist, passionate and beautiful and completely incompatible with his corporate world. Or so he'd convinced himself 20 years ago. "Your mother," Silas said carefully. "What's her name?" "Maria. She cleans offices at night so I can go to school during the day." Leo was packing up his art supplies with the efficiency of someone accustomed to quick relocations. "We live in Queens." The revelation struck Silas with the force of a lightning bolt. Maria Navarro, the woman he'd shared 6 months with 2 decades ago, the woman whose memory he'd buried under years of business meetings and merger negotiations, and ultimately his marriage to Helena. The timing aligned perfectly, horrifyingly perfectly. "Leo," Silas said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "How old are you?" 8. I'll be 9 next month." The mathematics were cruel in their precision. 20 years minus 11 months of pregnancy equaled exactly the right time frame. Silas stared at the boy, really looked at him for the first time, and saw details he'd missed before. The shape of Leo's nose, the set of his jaw, the way he held his head when concentrating, all carried subtle echoes of Silas's own features. "Does your mother ever talk about your father?" Leo's expression grew guarded. "She says he was a good man who had to go away for work. She says maybe someday we'll meet him, but not to count on it." The boy's matter-of-fact delivery of what must have been a source of pain made Silas's heart ache. "I need to speak with your mother," Silas said urgently. "Would that be okay?" Leo studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "She works late tonight, but she'll be home tomorrow morning. We live at 42nd Avenue in Elmhurst, Building 12, Apartment 4B. Silas memorized the address, his mind racing through implications and possibilities and fears. "Leo, I want you to keep drawing. You have an incredible gift." "I know," the boy said simply. "Mama says I got it from both sides of my family. She paints sometimes when she's not too tired." The casual reference to both sides of Leo's family sent another jolt through Silas. He watched as the child finished packing his supplies into a worn backpack that had seen better years. Everything about Leo spoke of careful maintenance and making do with less, a stark contrast to the abundance that surrounded Silas's daily life. "Will you be here tomorrow?" Silas asked. "Maybe. I come here when the weather's good and Mama doesn't need me to stay home." Leo shouldered his backpack and looked up at Silas with those penetrating eyes. "She's going to be surprised to see you." "Why do you say that?" "Because she still has your picture. She thinks I don't know about it, but I've seen her looking at it sometimes when she's really sad." Leo adjusted his backpack straps. "You look just like him, except older." The revelation that Maria had kept his photograph after all these years sent Silas reeling. He watched Leo walk away with the casual confidence of a child accustomed to navigating the world alone, and felt the weight of 20 years of choices pressing down on him. In the span of an hour, his entire understanding of his life had shifted on its axis. He looked down at the drawing still clutched in his hands. Helena's face gazed back at him with that gentle smile he remembered so well, but now the image carried additional weight. If Leo was indeed his son, then the boy's ability to see and draw Helena suggested something that defied rational explanation. The child had captured not just her physical appearance, but her essence, her spirit, in a way that should have been impossible for someone who had never met her. That evening, Silas paced his penthouse apartment like a caged animal. The drawing sat propped against a crystal vase on his dining table, Helena's image seeming to watch him as he moved back and forth across the marble floors. His mind churned through memories he'd carefully buried, excavating details from his relationship with Maria that he'd convinced himself were forgotten. She had been 22 to his 23, a first-generation immigrant from Guatemala who spoke 3 languages fluently and painted murals that transformed blank walls into windows to other worlds. Her apartment in Brooklyn had been tiny, but filled with color and life, every surface covered with canvases and sketches and half-finished sculptures. They'd met at a gallery opening where her work was being displayed alongside more established artists, and he'd been drawn to both her talent and her passion for social justice. For 6 months, they'd existed in separate worlds that collided only in the spaces between his business school classes and her night shifts at a restaurant in Little Italy. He'd been building the foundation of what would become his technology empire, spending 18-hour days writing code and developing business plans, while she'd been fighting to establish herself as a serious artist in a world that seemed determined to overlook her. The relationship had been intense, but ultimately unsustainable. His career demanded everything he had to give, and her dreams required a partner who could support her artistic pursuits rather than someone who saw them as charming hobbies. When he'd been offered a position at a startup in Silicon Valley, the decision to leave had seemed obvious. Maria had wished him well with tears in her eyes, and he'd promised to stay in touch, knowing they both understood it was a comfortable lie. Now, 20 years later, the possibility that their brief time together had created a child changed everything he thought he knew about his past. The Leo he'd met in the park carried traces of both parents in his features and abilities, a living bridge between 2 worlds that had seemed impossible to reconcile decades ago. Sleep proved elusive that night. Silas found himself standing at his floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city lights and wondering how many other secrets were hidden in the 8 million stories playing out below. Helena had always wanted children, but cancer had made that impossible for them. The cruel irony that he might have had a son all along, a child he'd never known existed, felt like another layer of loss piled onto his grief. The next morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical November weather that matched Silas's conflicted mood. He'd called in sick to work for the first time in 5 years, unable to imagine sitting through board meetings and conference calls when his entire life might be about to change. Instead, he found himself on a subway train heading toward Queens, carrying a folder of documents that might provide answers to questions he wasn't sure he was ready to ask. Elmhurst was a world away from Manhattan's gleaming towers. The neighborhood buzzed with the energy of working families, corner bodegas, and the beautiful chaos of multiple cultures creating community together. Building 12 stood among a row of similar brick structures, showing their age but maintained with the pride of residents who cared about their small corner of the world. Apartment 4B's door was painted deep blue, and Silas could hear the sound of music from within, something with guitar and Spanish lyrics that spoke of longing and hope. He stood in the hallway for nearly 10 minutes, gathering courage he hadn't needed since his first business presentation 20 years ago. Finally, he knocked. The music stopped, and he heard footsteps approaching. When the door opened, time collapsed on itself. Maria Navarro stood before him, 20 years older but still beautiful, her dark hair now threaded with silver, and her face carrying the lines that spoke of hard work and harder choices. Recognition dawned in her eyes, followed immediately by something that looked like fear. Silas. His name on her lips carried the weight of 2 decades. "Hello, Maria." He felt 17 again, nervous and uncertain. "I met Leo yesterday in Central Park." She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, resignation had replaced fear. "I wondered when this day would come. I hoped it wouldn't, for his sake, but I always knew it might. Can we talk?" She stepped aside to let him enter, and he found himself at a small apartment that felt like a warm embrace. Every wall displayed artwork, some clearly Maria's and others that bore the distinctive style he'd seen in Leo's park sketches. The space was modest but filled with life, plants thriving on windowsills and books stacked on every available surface. "He's at school," Maria said, settling onto a worn but comfortable sofa. "He won't be home for hours." "Maria, I need to know, is Leo my son?" The question hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they wanted to cross. Maria studied his face, and he saw her weighing options she'd probably considered countless times over the years. "Yes," she said simply. "He is." The confirmation, expected as it was, still hit Silas like a physical blow. He sank into a chair across from her, trying to process the magnitude of the revelation. "Why didn't you tell me? What would have been the point?" Maria's voice carried no accusation, only weariness. "You were building your empire in California. I was struggling to survive here. A baby would have complicated everything for both of us. I had a right to know." "Did you?" She leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. "You made it very clear that your career came first. You left for Silicon Valley without looking back. What would you have done if I'd called you 6 months later to say I was pregnant? Offered to send money? Flown back for weekend visits that would have disrupted your important meetings?" The accuracy of her assessment stung because Silas suspected she was right. The 23-year-old version of himself had been single-mindedly focused on success, willing to sacrifice anything and anyone who might slow his ascent. He might have done the right thing financially, but he wouldn't have been a real father, not the kind Leo deserved. "I would have tried," he said weakly. "Maybe, but I couldn't take that chance. Leo needed stability, not a father who saw him as an obligation." Maria's voice softened. "I won't apologize for protecting my son. Our son." The words felt strange on his tongue. Maria studied him for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression. "Why are you here now, Silas? You're obviously successful, probably more than you ever dreamed. You could have walked away from that park and never looked back. Why didn't you?" Silas pulled Helena's drawing from his jacket pocket and handed it to Maria. She took it with trembling fingers, her eyes widening as she recognized the image. "This is impossible," she whispered. "Leo has never seen this woman." Her name was Helena. She was my life. The past tense still felt like swallowing glass. She died 3 years ago in a car accident. Maria looked up from the drawing, understanding dawning in her eyes. And Leo drew this yesterday? He said she follows me when I walk. He said she told him to draw her so I'd know she's still with me. Silas's voice caught on the words. Maria, our son has a gift that goes beyond artistic talent. He sees things, knows things he shouldn't be able to know. I know. Maria's voice was barely above a whisper. He's always been like that. When he was little, he used to talk about his abuela, my mother, who died before he was born. He described her perfectly, knew things about her that I'd never told him. I thought maybe I'd mentioned them and forgotten, but then he started drawing strangers and knowing their stories. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of shared revelation settling between them. Finally, Maria spoke again. What do you want, Silas? From us? From Leo? It was the question he'd been dreading because he wasn't sure he knew the answer. 24 hours ago, his life had been defined by loss and loneliness. Now he was faced with the possibility of family, of connection, of purpose, beyond the accumulation of wealth and power. I want to know my son, he said finally. I want to be part of his life, if he'll let me. And I want to help, both of you. You shouldn't have to work nights cleaning offices. Leo shouldn't have to worry about whether he can afford art supplies. We don't need your charity. It's not charity, it's responsibility. Silas leaned forward, his voice gaining strength. I've missed 8 years of his life. I can't get that back, but I can make sure the next 8 years are different. Better. Maria was quiet for a long time, studying the drawing in her hands. When she finally looked up, tears glistened in her eyes. He asks about you sometimes. Not often, and never directly, but I can tell he wonders. Last month he drew a picture of a man in a suit, standing in an office, and when I asked who it was, he said it was someone who was looking for something he'd lost. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I think he's been waiting for you as much as you've been looking for him. The afternoon passed in careful conversation as they began the delicate process of rebuilding connections that had been severed 20 years ago. Maria showed him photo albums chronicling Leo's childhood, and Silas felt the sharp ache of all the moments he'd missed. First steps, first words, birthdays celebrated with homemade cakes and friends from the neighborhood, Leo's first art show at school, his proud smile as he stood next to a watercolor painting of the Elmhurst skyline. He's incredible, Silas said, studying a photograph of Leo at age 6, completely absorbed in painting a mural on the side of a community center. He is. And he's going to have questions when he finds out who you really are. Maria closed the album and looked at Silas seriously. Are you prepared for that? This isn't going to be easy. He's not a little boy who's going to run into your arms and call you daddy. He's 8 years old, he's intelligent, and he's going to want to understand why you weren't here before. I know, and I don't have good answers for him. Then you better find some, because Leo doesn't accept half-truths. He sees through everything. They were still talking when the front door opened, and Leo walked in, backpack slung over one shoulder and paint smudges on his school uniform. He stopped short when he saw Silas, his expression shifting from surprise. Something more complex. You came to see Mama, he said, setting down his backpack with careful precision. I did. We've been talking about you. Leo approached slowly, his dark eyes moving between Silas and Maria with the wariness of a child accustomed to protecting himself and his mother from potential threats. About the drawing? About a lot of things. Maria patted the sofa beside her, and Leo settled next to her, still watching Silas intently. Leo, do you remember what I told you about your father? That he was a good man who had to go away for work? Leo's recitation was matter-of-fact, but Silas caught the underlying tension in the boy's posture. Well, Sometimes people who go away come back when the time is right. Leo's eyes widened slightly as understanding began to dawn. He looked from Maria to Silas and back again, processing information with the same intensity he brought to his artwork. "You're him," Leo said to Silas. "It I." Wasn't a question. "Yes. I'm your father." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications and possibilities. Leo studied Silas's face with that unnerving intensity, as if searching for truth in his features. "Why did you come back now?" The question was delivered without accusation, but Silas felt its weight nonetheless. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that you'd been too selfish and ambitious to stay? Too focused on your own dreams to consider the consequences of your choices? "Because I didn't know about you," Silas said finally. "Your mother never told me you existed, and she had good reasons for that. I wasn't ready to be a father back then. I was too focused on my work to be the kind of dad you deserved. And now you are ready?" The directness of the question caught Silas off guard. Most adults would have danced around the issue, but Leo approached it with the brutal honesty of childhood. "I hope so. I want to try." Leo was quiet for several minutes, his gaze distant as if he were seeing something beyond the walls of the apartment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried that strange certainty Silas had noticed at the park. "The lady in the drawing, your wife, she says you have room in your heart now. She says losing her made space for other people." Maria's sharp intake of breath was audible. "Leo, how could you possibly know that? She told me. She's here sometimes when I'm drawing. She's sad about dying, but she's not angry. She wants him to be happy again." Leo looked directly at Silas. "She says you loved her enough for a lifetime, but lifetimes don't have to end with just one person." The profound wisdom coming from an 8-year-old left both adults speechless. Silas felt tears threatening again, not just for Helena, but for the mysterious gift his son possessed, the ability to bridge worlds and deliver messages from beyond understanding. "What else does she tell you?" Silas asked gently. "That you're going to teach me things, and I'm going to teach you things too. That we're both artists, just different kinds." Leo tilted his head thoughtfully. "And that Mama is going to paint again, really paint, not just little pictures when she's tired." Maria looked startled. "I haven't painted seriously in years." "Because you've been too busy taking care of me and working. But now, things are going to change." Leo spoke with the confidence of someone stating obvious facts. "He's going to help us." The certainty in the boy's voice left no room for argument. Silas found himself nodding, accepting a future he hadn't planned but somehow felt inevitable. "If you'll let me," he said to both Maria and Leo. Over the following weeks, Silas began the delicate process of integrating himself into their lives. He approached it with the same strategic thinking he brought to business negotiations, but quickly learned that family dynamics operated by entirely different rules. Leo was cautiously welcoming but maintained careful boundaries, observing this new father figure with the same intensity he brought to his artwork. Silas arranged for DNA testing to make the paternity official, though none of them really doubted the results. When the confirmation came back, he felt a strange mixture of relief and terror. Having a child was no longer theoretical. It was documented fact that came with legal and emotional responsibilities he'd never experienced. He also quietly began making financial arrangements. Maria's night job disappeared when an anonymous donor provided a full scholarship and living stipend for a promising single mother to attend graduate school in art therapy. Her protests were gentle but persistent until Leo intervened with his characteristic directness. "Mama, he has more money than we could spend in 10 lifetimes. Let him help so you can paint again." The boy's matter-of-fact assessment of Silas's wealth was accurate, if bluntly delivered. Silas had long since passed the point where money held any real meaning beyond a way of keeping score. Having family to spend it on gave his accumulated wealth purpose for the first time in years. Leo's artistic abilities continued to astound everyone who witnessed them. Word spread through art circles about the young prodigy who painted portraits that seemed to capture souls. And soon Leo was fielding requests from collectors and galleries. Silas found himself in the unusual position of managing his son's burgeoning career while trying to protect his childhood. "He's 8 years old," Silas argued during a heated phone conversation with a gallery owner who wanted to mount a solo exhibition of Leo's work. "He should be playing soccer and watching cartoons, not dealing with art critics and opening night receptions." But Leo had his own opinions about his artistic career, delivered with typical 8-year-old logic. "I like drawing people, and they like my drawings. Why is that bad?" "It's not bad, but I don't want you to feel pressured to perform for other people. I draw because I have to draw. The faces come whether people want to buy them or not." Leo looked up from his current sketch, a portrait of an elderly woman who visited the park every day to feed pigeons. "Besides, if I sell them, maybe Mama won't worry so much about money." The casual reference to financial stress that an 8-year-old shouldn't have to consider made Silas's chest tight. He realized that Leo had been aware of their struggles in ways Maria had tried to shield him from, carrying worries that no child should bear. As autumn turned to winter, their unconventional family began to find its rhythm. Silas maintained his penthouse apartment, but spent most evenings and weekends in Queens, sharing dinners around Maria's small kitchen table and helping Leo with homework that was far too easy for his advanced mind. They were careful with each other, like survivors of separate disasters, learning to trust in the possibility of stability. Helena's presence seemed to fade gradually from Leo's drawings, though the boy claimed she still visited occasionally. "She's not as sad anymore," he explained. "She says you're remembering how to live again." The observation was more accurate than Silas cared to admit. For the first time since Helena's death, he found himself looking forward to something beyond just getting through each day. Watching Leo discover new techniques in his artwork, seeing Maria slowly begin to trust in the security he could provide. Even the simple pleasure of grocery shopping for a family, instead of just himself, all contributed to a sense of purpose he'd forgotten was possible. Christmas approached with the peculiar excitement that comes with first experiences. Silas had celebrated holidays with Helena, but their traditions had been elegant and adult, centered around quiet dinners and carefully chosen gifts. Leo's enthusiasm for the season was infectious. His excitement over decorating the apartment and planning handmade presents for friends and neighbors reminding Silas of joys he'd forgotten were possible. "What do you want for Christmas?" Silas asked Leo one evening as they worked together on a jigsaw puzzle at the kitchen table. "For Mama to be happy," Leo said without hesitation. Really happy, not just not sad. The distinction caught Silas off guard. What would make her really happy? Her own art studio, somewhere she could paint big pictures again, like she used to. Leo fitted a puzzle piece into place with satisfaction. "And maybe for you to smile more. You smile now, but it's still kind of careful, like you're not sure it's okay." The 8-year-old's perceptiveness continued to amaze and unnerve Silas. Leo saw through pretenses and defenses with uncomfortable accuracy, delivering observations that cut straight to emotional truths adults spent years in therapy trying to uncover. "What about you? What would make you happy?" Leo considered the question seriously, his small fingers sorting through puzzle pieces with methodical precision. "I think I'm already happy. But maybe it would be nice if you weren't so scared of being my dad." The gentle directness of the observation hit Silas like a physical blow. "I'm not scared." "Yes, you are. You're scared you'll do it wrong, or that I won't like you, or that you'll mess up somehow." Leo looked up from the puzzle with those unnaturally perceptive eyes. "But you can't mess up being someone's dad just by trying. Mama told me that the worst parents are the ones who don't care enough to worry about it. That night, Silas lay awake in his penthouse apartment, thinking about his son's words. Leo was right, of course. Silas approached fatherhood with the same fear of failure that had driven him to success in business, but parenting operated by different metrics. There were no quarterly reports for emotional development, no profit margins to track the growth of love and trust. He thought about Helena, about the children they'd planned to have someday when the timing was right, when his company was more stable, when they had more time to devote to family. Someday had never come for them, but here was Leo, this incredible boy who'd appeared in his life like a gift he didn't deserve, offering him a second chance at happiness he'd thought was lost forever. The next day, Silas made several phone calls that would change everything. By evening, he had found the perfect space for Maria's art studio, a converted warehouse in Long Island City with northern exposure and enough room for canvases larger than anything she'd attempted in years. He also contacted his real estate agent about finding a house, something with bedrooms for everyone, and a yard where Leo could play, somewhere that felt more like home than refuge. When he presented these plans to Maria and Leo over dinner, their reactions were everything he'd hoped for, and more. "You don't have to do this," Maria said, but her eyes were bright with tears and possibilities. "I want to. I need to." Silas reached across the table to take her hand. "I've spent 20 years building something that doesn't mean anything without people to share it with. Let me do this for us, for our family." Leo's response was characteristically direct. "Does this mean you're going to stop being scared of being my dad?" "I'm going to try." "Good, because I've been drawing pictures of our new house, and you're in all of them." That spring, they moved into a colonial in Westchester, with enough bedrooms for everyone to have their own space and still come together when they wanted company. Maria's studio occupied the converted garage, flooded with natural light and equipped with professional-grade supplies that made her cry when she first saw them. Leo's room was painted the color of sky and filled with easels and art supplies that would have stocked a small gallery. Silas kept his Manhattan office but worked from home more often, video conferencing into meetings from his home office, while Leo did homework at the kitchen table and Maria painted in her studio. It was chaotic and wonderful, and nothing like the controlled perfection of his previous life. The integration wasn't without challenges. Leo occasionally retreated into himself when the emotional complexity of their new family dynamic became overwhelming. Maria struggled with accepting help after 20 years of fierce independence. Silas had to learn that being a father meant showing up consistently rather than just providing financially. That presence mattered more than presence. But slowly, carefully, they built something that resembled normal. Leo's artwork continued to amaze everyone who saw it, but now he painted landscapes and abstracts alongside his uncanny portraits, exploring new dimensions of his talent without the pressure of supporting his family. Maria returned to painting with a passion that reminded Silas why he'd fallen in love with her decades ago, her canvases exploding with color and emotion that took his breath away. And Silas learned to be happy again, not the careful contentment he'd settled for after Helena's death, but genuine joy in daily moments and shared experiences. He taught Leo to throw a baseball, and was astounded when the boy proved to be a natural athlete as well as an artist. He rediscovered his love of cooking, preparing elaborate weekend meals that brought them together around the dining table for conversations that ranged from Leo's latest art project to Maria's graduate school assignments to Silas's latest business ventures. Helena's presence faded from Leo's drawings entirely, though the boy claimed she still visited occasionally, usually when Silas was struggling with some aspect of fatherhood. "She says you're doing better than you think," Leo reported after one particularly difficult day when Silas had lost his temper over homework that wasn't getting done. "She says all parents mess up sometimes, and the good ones worry about it afterward." 2 years after that first meeting in Central Park, Silas stood in Maria's art studio watching her put finishing touches on a painting that would be featured in her first solo exhibition in 15 years. The canvas depicted a family of 3 sitting around a dinner table, their faces illuminated by candlelight and filled with the kind of contentment that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong. "It's beautiful," he said, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. "It's us," she said simply. Finally, Leo appeared in the studio doorway, paint-stained apron tied around his waist, and a satisfied smile on his face. At 10 years old, he had grown taller and more confident, but his eyes still held that same otherworldly perception that had first captivated Silas in Central Park. "I finished the commission," he announced, holding up a portrait that made both adults gasp. The painting depicted an elderly couple holding hands on a park bench, but it wasn't just their physical appearance that Leo had captured. The image seemed to glow with decades of shared love and mutual devotion, the kind of connection that survived hardships and celebrated joys together. "The Hendersons are going to cry when they see this," Maria said, studying her son's work with professional appreciation. "You've captured their entire love story." 63 years of marriage, Leo said matter-of-factly. "They told me their story while I painted. Mr. Henderson still brings her flowers every Friday, the same kind he gave her on their first date." Silas marveled at his son's ability to distill human emotion into visual form. Leo's artistic gifts had continued to evolve, but now they were balanced with the normal interests and activities of childhood. He played Little League baseball with enthusiasm if not exceptional skill, had friends from school who came over for sleepovers, and occasionally forgot to clean his room just like any other 10-year-old. The balance they'd achieved felt miraculous to Silas, who had spent years believing that happiness was something that happened to other people. His technology company continued to thrive under his leadership, but success no longer consumed every waking moment. He'd learned to delegate responsibilities and trust his team, creating space in his life for school plays and parent-teacher conferences and lazy Sunday mornings that stretched into afternoon adventures. "Dad, can we go to the park after lunch?" Leo asked, using the title that still made Silas's heart skip a beat even after 2 years. "I want to sketch the fountain before all the leaves fall." "Of course, but homework first." "Already done. Ms. Peterson said my essay about family traditions was one of the best she's ever read." Leo's pride was evident, but not boastful. He'd learned to take his abilities seriously without letting them make him arrogant. The essay in question had been about their Sunday tradition of cooking elaborate breakfasts together, each family member contributing their specialty to meals that often lasted until noon. Leo had written about how these gatherings represented the blending of their different backgrounds and experiences into something new and uniquely theirs. That afternoon, Silas and Leo walked through Central Park together, retracing the path that had led to their first meeting. The autumn air carried the same crisp promise of change, but now Silas approached each season with anticipation rather than dread. Leo set up his easel near the Bethesda fountain, attracting the same kind of curious crowd that had gathered around him years ago. "You're taller now," observed an elderly woman who remembered Leo from previous visits. "But you still have that magic touch." Leo smiled politely and began to sketch, his movements more confident but no less precise than they'd been as an 8-year-old. Silas watched from a nearby bench, no longer amazed by his son's talent, but deeply grateful for the journey that had brought them together. A young mother approached with a toddler in tow, asking about commissioning a family portrait. Leo listened to her request with the serious attention he gave to all potential subjects, then shook his head gently. "I don't take requests anymore," he explained. "But if you sit over there for a while, maybe someone will come to me to be drawn." It was the same mysterious process Silas had witnessed years ago, Leo's ability to see beyond the physical world into something deeper and more profound. The mother looked puzzled but settled onto the grass with her child, and Leo began to work. 20 minutes later, he revealed a portrait that made the woman cry. The drawing showed not just her and her toddler, but the ghostly outline of a man standing behind them, his hands resting protectively on their shoulders. "That's my husband," she whispered. "He died 6 months ago. How could you possibly know?" Leo's explanation was the same one he'd given Silas years earlier. "He's been with you. He wanted you to know he's still watching over his family." Silas felt the familiar chill that accompanied his son's supernatural encounters, but no longer questioned the gift that allowed Leo to serve as a bridge between worlds. The boy's abilities had brought healing to countless people over the years, offering comfort to the grieving and hope to those who thought they'd lost everything. As they walked home that evening, Leo was unusually quiet, his sketchpad tucked under his arm, and his expression thoughtful. "Everything okay?" Silas asked. "I was thinking about that lady today, the one whose husband died." Leo kicked at fallen leaves as they walked. "Do you think Mama was sad like that when you weren't here?" The question caught Silas off guard. Leo rarely asked about the years before they'd found each other, seeming to accept their current happiness without dwelling on what had come before. "Probably," Silas admitted, "but a different kind of sad. She had you, so she wasn't alone the way that woman is now. And she had hope that you might come back someday. The lady's husband can't come back, not really." Leo was quiet for a moment, but maybe knowing he's still watching helps her feel less alone. The profound empathy in his son's voice reminded Silas that Leo's gifts came with emotional costs as well as benefits. The boy felt other people's pain deeply, carrying the weight of their sorrows, even as he helped them heal. That night, as Silas tucked Leo into bed, his son asked another unexpected question. "Do you still miss Helena?" Silas considered his answer carefully. Leo had never shown jealousy about Helena's place in Silas's heart, accepting her memory as a natural part of their family story. "I'll always miss her," Silas said finally. "But missing someone doesn't mean you can't love other people too. My heart got bigger, not smaller, because of loving her. She knows that. She told me she's proud of how you learned to love us without forgetting her." Leo's voice was growing drowsy, but his words carried the same certainty they always did when he spoke of supernatural encounters. "She says families can have all different shapes, and ours is exactly the right shape for us." Silas kissed his son's forehead and turned off the light, but Leo's words echoed in his mind as he made his way downstairs. Maria was waiting in the living room with 2 glasses of wine and a stack of college brochures spread across the coffee table. "Thinking about the future?" Silas asked, settling beside her on the couch. "Leo's future, specifically. He's going to need educational opportunities that can challenge his intellect while nurturing his artistic development." Maria handed him a wine glass and leaned against his shoulder. "Some of these programs start accepting applications for gifted students as young as 12. Silas studied the brochures, each representing prestigious institutions with specialized programs for exceptionally talented children. Part of him wanted to keep Leo close, to protect him from the pressures and expectations that came with extraordinary ability. But he knew that would be selfish, limiting his son's potential out of his own fear of letting go. What does Leo think about all this? That's the interesting part. When I asked him about it, he said he already knows where he's supposed to go to school. Apparently, he's been drawing pictures of a specific campus for months. Maria pulled out a sketch pad and showed Silas several detailed drawings of Gothic architecture and tree-lined walkways. "I finally identified it yesterday. It's the Rhode Island School of Design." The drawings were incredibly detailed, showing buildings and landscapes Leo had never seen in person. Yet they captured not just the physical appearance of the campus, but something more intangible, a sense of creative energy and intellectual stimulation that seemed to radiate from the paper. "He's 10 years old," Silas said weakly. "RISD doesn't even have programs for children that young. They don't have traditional programs, but they do have special arrangements for exceptional cases. I made some calls today." Maria's voice carried a mixture of excitement and trepidation. "There's a professor there, Dr. Elizabeth Chen, who specializes in working with gifted young artists. She's willing to meet with Leo and evaluate his work." The prospect of his son leaving home, even for an educational opportunity that could shape his entire future, filled Silas with unexpected anxiety. He'd only been Leo's father for 2 years, and the idea of missing more of his childhood felt like another loss he wasn't sure he could bear. "We don't have to decide anything right away," Maria said, recognizing his internal struggle. "But I think we owe it to Leo to explore his options. His gifts are so extraordinary that limiting them would be doing him a disservice." Over the following weeks, they began the careful process of investigating educational possibilities for Leo. Dr. Chen visited their home and spent several hours with Leo, reviewing his portfolio and discussing his artistic process. Her reaction was everything they'd hoped for and feared. "I've been working with gifted young artists for 25 years, she told them after Leo had gone to bed. "I've never encountered anyone quite like your son. His technical skills are remarkable, but it's his emotional intelligence and spiritual sensitivity that make his work truly extraordinary. What are you recommending?" Silas asked, though he dreaded the answer. "A customized program that would allow Leo to spend part of each year on campus, working with graduate students and faculty, while still maintaining his connection to home and family. He's too young for full-time residential study, but he needs intellectual and artistic challenges that no traditional school can provide." The proposal was exactly what Silas had feared, an opportunity so perfect for Leo that refusing it would be selfish and short-sighted. Yet the thought of his son spending months away from home, even for the best possible reasons, felt like another kind of loss. Leo's reaction to Dr. Chen's proposal was characteristically direct. "When would I start?" he asked. "Not for another year at least. You'd need time to prepare, and we'd need time to develop a program specifically designed for your needs." Dr. Chen studied Leo with the same intensity he usually directed at his subjects. "Are you interested in this kind of intensive artistic education?" "I think so. I dream about that place sometimes, about making art with other people who understand what it feels like to see things differently." Leo looked at Silas and Maria with concern. "But I don't want to leave my family. We just found each other." "You wouldn't be leaving us," Maria assured him. "You'd be growing, exploring new possibilities, and you'd always come home. Besides," Silas added, surprising himself with his words, "part of loving someone is wanting what's best for them, even when it's hard." That winter, they began preparing for Leo's eventual departure for Rhode Island. It was a gradual process, involving correspondence courses to ensure his academic preparation and portfolio development to showcase his artistic evolution. Leo threw himself into the work with characteristic intensity, but he also made sure to savor his remaining time at home. He painted a series of family portraits, capturing moments of daily life with the same supernatural insight he brought to commissioned work. One showed Silas reading the newspaper at the breakfast table, but the image also conveyed his contentment and sense of belonging. Another depicted Maria in her studio, surrounded by the creative energy that flowed from her like visible light. The most moving portrait was of the three of them together, but it included ghostly figures of Helena and Maria's deceased mother, both women smiling with approval at the family that had formed in their absence. When Silas saw the finished painting, he understood that Leo's gifts weren't just about artistic talent or supernatural perception. They were about love, about seeing and honoring the connections that bind people together across time and space. Spring arrived with its usual promise of renewal, and with it came the final preparations for Leo's departure to Rhode Island. The parting would be temporary, just a summer intensive program, but it represented a milestone in their family's evolution. The night before Leo left, they held a special dinner in his honor, complete with all his favorite foods and a cake Maria had decorated with edible paintbrushes and palettes. Leo seemed calm about the impending separation, but Silas could see traces of nervousness beneath his composed exterior. "I'll call every day," Leo promised, as they cleaned up after dinner. "And we'll visit whenever you want us to," Maria added. "This is an adventure, not a goodbye." That night, Silas found Leo sitting in his room, staring out the window at the stars barely visible through the suburban light pollution. "Having second thoughts?" Silas asked, settling on the edge of the bed. "Not exactly. I know this is what I'm supposed to do. I can feel it, the same way I feel when someone needs to be drawn." Leo turned to face his father. "But I'm scared too. What if I'm not as good as they think I am? What if I disappoint everyone?" The vulnerability in his son's voice broke Silas's heart. For all his extraordinary abilities, Leo was still a child facing the unknown. "Do you want to know a secret?" Silas asked. "I was terrified when I first started my company. I had no idea what I was doing, and I was sure everyone would figure out that I was just making it up as I went along. But you succeeded, because I kept trying, even when I was scared, and because I had people who believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." Silas pulled Leo into a hug. "You have something I didn't have at your age. You have a family who loves you unconditionally, who will support you no matter what happens. And Helena," Leo added softly, "she says this is just the beginning of my real work." The next morning, they drove Leo to Rhode Island, the car loaded with art supplies and enough clothes for a month-long stay. The RISD campus was exactly as Leo had drawn it. Gothic buildings surrounded by students carrying portfolios and discussing projects with passionate intensity. Dr. Chen met them at the dormitory where Leo would be staying with other young artists in a special residential program. The goodbye was emotional but not devastating, tempered by the knowledge that this was growth rather than loss. "I'll see you in a month," Leo said, hugging both parents fiercely. "And I'll have so much to show you." The drive home was quiet. Both Silas and Maria lost in their own thoughts about how quickly their little boy was growing up. The house felt strangely empty without Leo's presence. But it wasn't the devastating emptiness Silas remembered from after Helena's death. This was the poignant emptiness of watching someone you love spread their wings. 2 weeks into Leo's program, they received a package with no return address. Inside was a painting that took their breath away. Leo had painted the 3 of them as they'd been on that first day in Central Park when he was 8 years old and drawing portraits for $20. But this version included details he couldn't have known then, emotions and connections that only became clear in retrospect. The painting showed the moment of recognition, the instant when Silas realized he was looking at Helena's face in Leo's drawing. But it also showed the invisible threads that connected all of them, past and present, love transcending time and loss to create something new and beautiful. A note accompanied the painting, written in Leo's careful handwriting. "This is where our real story began. Thank you for letting me grow up to tell it." 3 years later, Leo graduated from the special program at RISD with honors and a full scholarship to continue his education there. His work had been featured in galleries across the country, and collectors competed to commission pieces from the young artist who could somehow capture souls on canvas. But fame and financial success hadn't changed Leo's essential nature. He still possessed the same otherworldly perception, the same ability to see beyond surface appearances to deeper truths. He used his gifts to help others, donating time and artwork to charitable causes and continuing to paint portraits for grieving families who needed to know their loved ones were still with them. Silas and Maria married quietly on a beach in Cape Cod, with Leo serving as best man and ring-bearer simultaneously. The ceremony was small and intimate, witnessed only by close friends and the invisible presence of those who had brought them together. Helena's influence was felt, but not intrusive, a blessing rather than a haunting. Their blended family had grown to include Maria's elderly father, who moved in with them after a mild stroke, and a rescued dog named Pallet, who seemed to understand that Leo's art supplies were off-limits, but everything else in the house was fair game. The chaos was beautiful and imperfect, and exactly what Silas had never known he wanted. On quiet evenings, when Leo was home from college, and Maria was working in her studio, and Pallet was snoring by the fireplace, Silas would sometimes think about the chain of events that had led to this moment. A chance encounter in Central Park, a $20 sketch, a face from the past appearing in impossible circumstances. Any rational person would dismiss the supernatural elements as coincidence or imagination, but Silas had learned to accept mystery as part of love's equation. Leo still painted Helena occasionally, but now she appeared in family portraits as a benevolent presence, watching over their happiness rather than a symbol of loss and longing. In these paintings, she seemed truly at peace, her mission of bringing Silas and his son together complete. The last painting Leo created before graduating college showed the entire extended family gathered around their dining room table for Sunday breakfast, multiple generations sharing food and stories and unconditional love. But if you looked carefully, you could see other figures in the shadows, all the people who had shaped their lives and continued to influence their choices, even in absence. Maria's mother was there, her hands resting proudly on Leo's shoulders. Helena sat beside Silas, her expression serene and approving. Even distant relatives and family friends who had passed on seemed to crowd into the frame, all of them united by the invisible bonds that connect hearts across time and space. At the center of it all sat Leo, no longer the 8-year-old boy who had drawn portraits in Central Park, but a young man whose gifts had grown to encompass not just artistic talent, but wisdom and compassion beyond his years. His eyes still held that otherworldly perception, but now it was balanced with humor and joy and the confidence that comes from knowing you are loved unconditionally. The morning Silas first saw Helena's face in Leo's drawing, he had thought his life was defined by loss. Now he understood that loss had simply made room for a different kind of love, one that encompassed past and present and future in ways he never could have imagined. He had gained not just a son and a second chance at love with Maria, but an understanding that families come in all shapes and sizes, bound together by threads stronger than blood and more enduring than time. As Leo packed his things for graduate school in Italy, where he would study classical techniques while developing his unique artistic voice, Silas felt the familiar mixture of pride and trepidation that came with watching his son embrace new challenges. But this time, the fear was tempered by confidence in the foundation they had built together. "I'll miss you," Silas said, helping Leo load canvases into the car. "I'll miss you too, but missing someone doesn't mean you stop loving them, right?" Leo's words echoed the wisdom Silas had shared years earlier, proof that the lessons of love travel in all directions within families. Right. And loving someone means wanting what's best for them, even when it takes them far away. Exactly. Leo hugged his father tightly. Besides, distance is just geography. Love doesn't have boundaries. As they drove to the airport, Silas reflected on the unexpected ways that love had rebuilt his life. A chance encounter with a gifted child had led to the discovery of a son he never knew existed, which had led to reconciliation with a lost love, which had created a family more beautiful and complex than anything he could have planned. Helena's face still graced the walls of their home, but now her image was part of a larger story about love's ability to transcend loss and create new possibilities. She had kept her promise, delivered through Leo's impossible drawing, that love never truly ends but transforms into different shapes and expressions. Standing in the airport departure lounge, watching his 21-year-old son board a plane for Rome, Silas felt a peace he hadn't known was possible during those dark years after Helena's death. He had learned that happiness doesn't replace sorrow but coexists with it, creating a richer and more complex emotional landscape than either joy or grief could achieve alone. Leo turned back at the boarding gate and waved, his smile bright with excitement and possibility. In that moment, Silas saw not just his son, but all the people who had contributed to this moment. Maria's strength and sacrifice, Helena's enduring influence, even his own younger self, who had been too afraid and ambitious to recognize love when it first appeared. The story that had begun with a $20 sketch in Central Park had evolved into something far more valuable than any business deal or financial acquisition Silas had ever completed. He had gained a family, lost his fear of loving and losing, and discovered that the most important success in life couldn't be measured in dollars or market share, but in the depth of connections forged between human hearts. As Leo's plane disappeared into the sky, Silas felt Helena's presence one last time, not as a source of sadness, but as a reminder that love truly never ends. It simply finds new ways to express itself, new people to embrace, new stories to create. The little boy who had drawn her face in the park had been right all along. She wanted Silas to be happy again, and happiness had arrived in forms he never could have anticipated. Walking back to the car where Maria waited, Silas smiled at the beautiful unpredictability of love and the mysterious ways that families form across time and loss, and the impossible distances that seem to separate hearts but never really do. Their story would continue, shaped by Leo's adventures in Italy and Maria's evolving artistic career, and Silas's growing understanding that the best parts of life often arrive disguised as chance encounters that turn out to be destiny after all. The drawing that had started it all still hung in Leo's childhood bedroom, Helena's face watching over the space where their impossible family had first begun to take shape. But now it was surrounded by hundreds of other images: family photos, Maria's paintings, Leo's sketches of their life together, and all the visual evidence of love's power to create beauty from loss and hope from the ashes of broken dreams. In the end, Silas Monroe had learned the most valuable lesson of all: that love doesn't end with death, but transforms, finding new expressions and new people to embrace, creating families in the most unexpected ways, and proving that the heart's capacity for connection is infinite and eternal, and always ready to begin again.